Everybody, my name is Jennifer Hoglund. I'm here on behalf of the Calgary Horticultural Society, and today is the second in a three-part series on growing fruit in the Calgary garden. So our previous video, we talked about tree fruit and all the different kinds that can grow here. This video, we're going to talk about shrub fruit. We're going to talk about the different kinds that do well here in Calgary, a little bit about each one, some things to note for each type as well, and then we're going to list some varieties that do really well here. Our next video is going to be on all the other fruit that grows here in Calgary, including vines, brambles, and ground fruit. So getting started today, we are going to talk about sour cherries, cherry plums, they are also called chums here in Calgary, Saskatoons, very popular fruit, haskaps, also known as honeyberries, currants and gooseberries we're going to talk about together as they're closely related and have quite a few similar properties. And then we're going to talk about some other prairie cherries that grow well here, nankings, pin cherries, choke cherries, all of those guys. We're going to finish off with a few ornamental shrubs that have edible berries. You may have some of these in your yard already and not even know that they're edible. All right, so starting off, we're going to talk about sour cherries. Most of these are multi-stemmed shrubs, with the exception of Evans. That's the one on the left-hand side there. Evans sour cherries are usually sold as a tree on a single trunk. However, every once in a while you do find them as a shrub, multi-stemmed shrub as well. They're called sour cherries. They're actually quite sweet. All of these varieties that we're going to talk about today can be eaten fresh off the tree with absolutely no problem. Sour cherries are massive producers. They have a lot of fruit every season. If you're going to go for one single fruit producing tree or shrub and you want bulk fruit, sour cherries are definitely the way to go. They produce a lot. Often the sheer weight of cherries on a tree will bend the branches almost to the ground, which is usually okay. Cherry trees and shrubs have very flexible branches, but you do need to keep an eye on them if you get a really, really productive year and those branches are bending all the way to the ground. You may have to put some supports under there. 2x4s work fantastically for that. One final thing to note with sour cherries, they can be fairly short-lived trees and shrubs. They use a lot of energy in producing the amount of cherries that they do, and as a result, they tend to live not quite as long as most trees and shrubs. So, as I mentioned, there are Evans sour cherries, which is usually sold in tree form. The remaining sour cherries that are available in Calgary and area usually belong to what is called the Romance series. It is a number of different varieties. All of them, including Evans, actually were developed in Saskatchewan. So they're extremely, extremely hardy here in Calgary and area. They, unlike other prunus species, do not require a pollinator. So you can have just one in your yard and that is enough, you will get fruit. They vary, the different varieties vary in the size of the shrub. They also vary in size of the cherries, sweetness of the cherries, color, how dark, how bright red, and very important factor, they vary in how much the shrub suckers. These are sprouts that come from the bottom, from the ground, that usually come off the roots. They can be a good thing or a bad thing, depending on what you're looking for your yard. Shrubs that produce suckers are perfect for making hedges, especially veggies, what we like to call food-producing hedges. And they're also really good if you want to propagate, make new shrubs. Those suckers, if you let them grow for 1 or 2 years, you can just cut them out as far back to the main shrub as you can, dig them up and replant them anywhere else you would like. So really easy to reproduce. And types of sour cherries, as mentioned, include the Evans. And the rest of these on here are all part of the Romance series. Very romantic names. Evans tends to have the largest yield in terms of poundage, and it also has quite large fruit. However, it does have the most suckers out of all of these, so something to be aware of. Carmine Jewel has very sweet fruit, kind of small sized fruit. Each individual one is fairly small. However, they have very small pits in each one. So Carmine Jewel has actually the highest flesh to pit ratio out of all of them. Crimson Passion, very sweet. It has the firmest flesh out of all of the cherries, the smallest bush size, and the fewest number of suckers. So this one is a really good option for those of you with small urban yards. All right. Cupid is an extremely hardy variety, has the darkest red color fruit, probably the lowest yield out of all of them, and it ripens last. So this is a good one if you want to extend your cherry growing season. You can have one of the other varieties, add Cupid on there, and you'll have cherries able to be picked even longer. Romeo is a very sweet fruit, a little bit smaller size, and has very, very heavy yields. However, it tends to have an off year every second year. So very heavy yield one year, next year quite low, heavy yield the next year, quite low the year after that, etc. Juliet is a very hardy one, again, just like Cupid is. Quite sweet fruit and has really strong branches. So will almost never break from weight of fruit, so you don't have to worry about it quite as much, and is a larger shrub compared to the rest. And last but not least is Valentine. Valentine has the brightest red color fruit, is a larger shrub, very, very productive, and ripens early. So once again, extending your cherry picking season. All right, that's it for sour cherries. Moving on, we're going to talk about cherry plums next. Cherry plums are also known as chums, just to shorten it up. They are a cross between a Japanese plum and a sand cherry. Now, a sand cherry is not actually a cherry. It's a cherry-sized plum. It's an ornamental shrub. It's very common. You can find it in most of the greenhouses around Calgary and area, and is a beautiful shrub on its own. However, when we cross it with the Japanese plum, we get these things called chums. Chums are a multi-stemmed shrub. They come in a variety of sizes. However, most of them are fairly small, making them perfect for urban yards. There are a variety of skin colors: black, purple, red, yellow, greeny yellow colors. The flesh, though, is typically red or yellow on the inside. So chums are a little bit different than regular plums. They tend to be smaller than plums. They tend to be on a shrub versus a tree. They have a much higher yield than the plums do, and they tend to actually have a little bit better flavor than plums. So a lot of good things to be said about chums versus plums. They do tend to have a little bit more winter dieback, however, especially if you do not have snow cover or as much snow cover as you could. Not a big deal usually. They bounce back very easily. All we got to do is do some pruning of that winter dieback in spring once it starts to bud out. So something to keep in mind. Varieties of chums that we have here in Calgary. Ooh. They are usually grouped based on the color of their skin. Ones that do really well here, I have listed up on the screen for you. Unlike plums, when chums are perfectly ripe, they stay on the tree. Most plums will fall off when they reach perfect ripeness. Chums will stay on the tree, which is a good thing actually, because the longer that they stay on there, the sweeter they get. So if you can have patience, you will have sweeter fruit. Like plums, chums require a pollinator. You must have one of a different variety, and that other variety must be fairly close, within about 100 feet or so, so either in your yard or a neighbor's yard. Any variety that blooms at the same time as the one you have will work perfectly for pollination. All right, Saskatoons, one of my favorites. Saskatoons are actually not a berry. They are a palm fruit, so they're related to apples and pears and cotoneasters as well. They grow wild all throughout Alberta and Saskatchewan. You can find them growing wild in many of the parks throughout Calgary here. Feel free to pick them. They are edible. However, make sure before you do that, that they have not been sprayed with any chemicals. We don't want to eat those. And little tip, pick the ones higher up on the shrubs so you don't get any that have been peed on by dogs. Gross. They're very hardy, obviously, by the fact that they grow wild around here. Most of them are zone 2. I've heard of a number of people having success growing them in zone 1 as well. Shrubs have beautiful flowers. Think apple blossom. They're closely related. They have amazing fall foliage, beautiful golds, reds, and oranges. Absolutely gorgeous. Saskatoons can be used just like blueberries in baking and in preserves, and in my opinion are the most fantastic fruit for pies. Could be a little prejudice there. My grandma made amazing Saskatoon pies. Things to keep in mind with Saskatoons, birds enjoy them just as much as we do. So using some netting over top of your shrubs will really help increase what you have left to pick. Or you could also grow more and share. All right, we're gonna go. Saskatoons are self-pollinating, so all you need is one shrub and you can have lots of productive fruit. Varieties differ in the size of the shrub themselves. They differ in size of the fruit, sweetness of the fruit, but the biggest thing to keep in mind when you're selecting a variety is how much that variety suckers. Just like with the sour cherries, many of these do sucker, which can be a good thing or a bad thing depending on what you want to use it for in your landscape. The varieties that grow here include these ones as listed on the screen. Smoky tends to be the sweetest of all the varieties and is thought to have the best fruit of all of them. However, it does sucker a lot, so you need to take that into consideration. Thiessen is considered to have the second best fruit, and it has few suckers. Northline is the first of all the varieties to fruit, so early fruit for you. Lots of suckers with that one though. Regent has smaller berries than the other varieties, has few suckers though. And Pembina is the smallest shrub size of all of them. Good taste and few suckers. So if you're looking for a small urban yard, Pembina is the variety that you should gravitate towards first. All right, moving on. We're going to talk about haskaps. Haskaps are also called honeyberries. They're a member of the honeysuckle family, one of the few members of the honeysuckle family that has edible fruit. Not all honeysuckles are edible. They taste kind of like a cross between a raspberry and a blueberry. They are a superfruit. All right, tons of antioxidants in these guys, even more than blueberries actually. Very healthy for you. They are the first thing to bloom in terms of fruit in the garden. Very early in the year, they're actually the first thing that those big fat bumblebees have for nectar in my yard here. I love watching the big bumblebees, love the honeyberries. So great for our early pollinators. They're also the first to produce fruit out of any of the fruit trees and shrubs by far, usually in June, sometimes early June, depending on the season and the year that we're having in terms of climate. Haskaps or honeyberries do very well in our Calgary climate here. They love our cool weather. They're actually native to Siberia. So they're very, very, very hardy here. Hence, they're early blooming and producing. They are super, super easy to grow. They don't require pruning unless you want to keep it a little bit tidier, or reduce the size a bit. But pruning is not mandatory. They don't sucker at all, and they're usually a medium to a small sized shrub, most of them. So very, very easy care, fantastic for almost all urban yards here. They are actually what I recommend usually to plant instead of blueberries. And you will notice that I have not listed blueberries to talk about in this video series. And there's a good reason for that. Blueberries actually like the opposite of what we have here in Calgary. They like acidic soil, we have alkaline. They like moist, peaty soil, we have clay, usually quite dry soil. So blueberries take a huge amount of effort to get to grow well here. Honeyberries, or haskaps, on the other hand, love our climate. They love our soil. They like that it's alkaline. They're totally okay with it being clay. And they're so much easier to grow. So haskaps, honeyberries, not blueberries unless you're ready to put in a lot of work and like the challenge. So honeyberries also are very well loved by birds, just like Saskatoons are. As a result, if you want a high production, netting is a really good idea. Or plant enough to share with everybody, birds included. All right, varieties for Calgary and area. As with the sour cherries, varieties differ in the size of the shrub, when they bloom, and the size and shape of the fruit. Little tidbit, some people think that the flatter the bottom of the honeyberry, so the less pointed on the bottom, the sweeter the berry. Not sure if that's true, but it's something you can do a little research into yourself and see if you think that's true or not. Honeyberries do require a pollinator of a different variety, and that different variety must bloom at the same time in order for bees to be able to pollinate them. The best way to find one that blooms at the same time is talk to your garden center where you bought your honeyberry from. There's also quite a few really good charts that you can find online that will tell you which ones will pollinate which other ones. All right, when picking honeyberries and haskaps, we need to have a little bit of patience. They will turn from greeny white to a dark purple color. That's not quite ripe. We have to wait for them to turn that nice purple color, and then we got to give them about 5 more days. And that's when they're at their sweetest. So they may look ripe, have a little bit more patience, then pick them, about 5 more days worth. So haskaps are grouped into 3 main categories based on when they ripen. There's early season haskaps, there's early to mid-season haskaps, and there's late season haskaps. The ones that do best in Calgary here are the early to mid-season haskaps. And those are the ones that I've listed here on the screen for you. Aurora tends to be the best tasting. Borealis is also very good tasting. Borealis tends to have the fruit a little bit deeper into the shrub, a little bit more hidden by the leaves. So it may take birds a little bit longer to find them, but once they do, they will be in there, just so you know. Honeybee is a really productive one. Tundra has the firmest berries and the highest antioxidant level out of all of the haskaps. Indigo gem, also called indigo treat or indigo yum, has a little bit smaller fruit, and they also say that indigo gem is self-pollinating. Once again, you will get higher production, however, if you have more than one variety. So you can only have room for one, go with indigo gem. If you want higher production, put in another variety as well. All right, moving on. Currants and gooseberries. We're going to talk about both of these together. They are all members of the ribes genus. And there's a huge variety in these guys. So currants come in black currants. That's these guys at the bottom center here. They have red currants, they have white currants, and they have pink currants. And there are also golden currants. Golden currants are called golden not because of the color of the fruit, but because of the color of the flowers. Golden currants actually have red or black colored fruit, just to keep you on your toes and make it confusing. Gooseberries are larger than currants, tend to be a little bit sweeter in my opinion. They come in black, green, and red varieties, and gooseberries have lots of thorns, so gloves are mandatory when picking. All right, so currants and gooseberries are actually one of my favorites, maybe my very most favorite to grow here in Calgary. For a few reasons. They're a smaller sized, lower growing shrub, so they take up very little room in your yard. They absolutely love Calgary soil and climate. They're really hardy. Many of the varieties are hardy to zone 2. They absolutely love alkaline soil. They are super okay with our clay soil and our dry climate. And the absolute best thing about currants and gooseberries is that they will take a fair amount of shade. This is good because there is no other fruit out there that will, with one exception that we're going to talk about in our next video under our vines. But they will take a fair amount of shade, quite a lot. Not full shade, but definitely dappled shade, definitely part shade. So they're fantastic for planting under our trees. Especially fruit trees if you're going to grow a food forest. So something to keep in mind there. They also propagate by tip. So they can be a little bit of a messy looking shrub. If you want to keep it tidy, it does require some pruning to keep it looking nice and neat. If you're okay with it looking a bit messy, pruning is less mandatory. And if you want to propagate them, all you got to do is let the branches tip down and touch the soil. They will actually root where the tips touch the soil. So you give it 1 to 2 years to let the roots really establish. And then you just cut the branch off, dig up that little rooted portion, and you can move that to a new location and you have a second gooseberry or currant. So really easy to propagate. However, it will spread that way as well, so you got to keep that in mind. All right, so varieties of gooseberries and currants. So some of these guys do require a pollinator, same variety, or sorry, same type, different variety. Some do not. So once again, make use of the expertise that we have in our nurseries and garden centers and ask them when you are purchasing if you need a pollinator or not. Okay, if you do, it needs to be within the same type. So another black currant with a black currant, another white currant with a white currant, etc. All of them, however, will produce more berries if they have a second variety. Okay. So going through each of these, black currants have the largest size fruit of all the currants, not as large as gooseberry, mind you. They tend to be quite intensely flavored, the black currants. They're not to everybody's taste. So if you're interested, maybe give one a taste before you plant in your yard. However, whether you like to eat them fresh or not, they are fantastic for processing. Things like jams and jellies. Wine, blackcurrant wine and blackcurrant syrup is also a very popular option for people. After that, red is a little bit sweeter, white is sweeter than red, and pink is the sweetest of all the currants. There's not a ton of varieties available of the white and pink yet, but we will definitely be seeing more of those in the future. They're doing a lot of work with those. Golden currants I haven't listed on here because they are typically not planted for fruit production. The fruit is not the best tasting of all the currants. You can, however, find them in garden centers as ornamental shrubs, the golden currants. And they're usually not named varieties, they're just called golden currants on the tag. So if you're curious, that's what you look for a golden currant. Gooseberries, as I mentioned, lots of thorns, larger size fruit, really good for processing, also fantastic for fresh eating. There's also something out there called a jostaberry. I'm starting to see more of every year. A jostaberry is a cross between a gooseberry and a black currant. So it has the very large size of gooseberries, but it is thornless like the currants, kind of the best of both worlds there. Something to keep in mind with a jostaberry, however, is that it does tend to be a little bit less hardy, usually a zone 4. All right, moving on. There are lots of other cherries and berries that do very well in Calgary and area. Most of these have been grown on the prairies for a really long time, and they're all super hardy and they do very well here. The one on the left right here is a Nanking cherry. Very common on farms and acreages throughout the prairies because they do well. Top middle here is a choke cherry. Bottom middle here is a Ronia, also called a choke berry. Top right here is cherry principia, and the bottom right is a pin cherry. So we're going to talk about each one of these really quickly. Nanking cherries are probably my second favorite fruit after Saskatoons. They are incredibly productive shrubs. They produce a ton of fruit. They have bright red, large cherries, about the same size as our sour cherries. A little bit tartar, however. Definitely not so tart that you can't eat them right off the bush fresh. Done that since I could crawl. They are a little bit tartar, however, than the sour cherries. They flower super early in the year, right after the haskaps and honeyberries. Beautiful to see in flower, but also beautiful to see in the fall. Amazing fall foliage, bright reds, yellows, and oranges. And they also have very unique leaves in the Prunus genus, as they are really soft and fuzzy. All right, pin cherries. Pin cherries are smaller than our Nankings, also bright red cherries. They're a little bit tartar than the Nankings, so often used for juice, jelly, and wine. They can be eaten fresh. They're just quite small, so not as much flesh on there for eating. They are super hardy here in Calgary and area. However, one thing to keep in mind with pin cherries is they must have full sun for production. If they do not have full, bright, all-day sun, they will not produce for you. They are also incredibly drought tolerant, which is why they can be found on many of the farms throughout our prairies. It does sucker a fair amount, though, something to keep in mind with the pin cherries. Moving on, choke cherries. Choke cherries have very tart, very small black or red fruit, usually used for jelly, syrup, and wine. They come in both shrub forms and tree forms. The most common one that probably everyone here has seen is the Schubert choke cherry. It's a very common boulevard tree here in Calgary. It's got the dark purple leaves and the little black berries on them. That's a Schubert choke cherry. You can eat those. They're quite tart raw, however, so they're usually processed. Things to keep in mind with choke cherries. If anybody has a Schubert choke cherry, you know they sucker like crazy, as do all of the choke cherries. Another thing to keep in mind is that choke cherries are very prone to the fungus black knot. So always keep an eye on yours, check yours regularly. If you do see any black knot, that needs to be pruned out immediately. Moving on, Aronia. Aronia is also known as chokeberry. It is a palm fruit, not a berry, and not a cherry. It is a mid-sized shrub. It has black, quite astringent berries on it. They are considered a superfruit, so lots and lots of antioxidants in aronias. They do sucker quite a bit, so they are often used for hedging. Cherry Principia is a mid-sized shrub. It's quite thorny. It has tart, small red fruit that are good for fresh eating or for processing. It does sucker a ton, and that being combined with the thorns that it has makes Cherry Principia fantastic for hedging, especially for keeping out herbivores like deer and rabbits out of your yard. Cherry Principia is quite rare and hard to find, but a beautiful shrub and good eating if you can find them here. All right, next we're going to talk about a couple of the lesser known edible bush fruit. Some of these you may already have in your yard. Most of these are sold as ornamental shrubs. If you have them already in your yard and they're not producing fruit for you, it may just be a matter of not having a pollinator nearby. So either getting another variety of the same type or convincing your neighbors to get one should result in you getting fruit. Most of them have fairly tart or astringent fruit, so they are usually used in making wines, syrups, and preserves. All right, varieties of lesser known bush fruit for Calgary. High bush cranberry is an extremely common ornamental shrub sold in pretty much every garden center here in Calgary. The most common is the American high bush cranberry. Gorgeous shrub, fantastic fall foliage. And the picture of it is this middle one right here. Pretty, hey? They have beautiful colored branches and beautiful shaped leaves. Really nice looking shrub. High bush cranberry is completely different than the low bush cranberry. Low bush cranberry is what we buy in the grocery store for cranberries, and they like peaty, really moist, acidic environments, not Calgary. Moving on, elderberry. That's this guy on the top right here. Elderberry is a really showy ornamental shrub. Very many varieties of leaf shapes, colors, branch colors, really pretty. Elderberry is usually made for making elderberry syrup, which is very common lately in alternative medicine, used for coughs and colds. So becoming quite trendy right now, elderberry syrup. You can make your own if you have elderberry in your yard. Serviceberry is a very close relative of Saskatoon's, has similar properties. The serviceberry that is sold as an ornamental shrub usually has much lower production than Saskatoon and much smaller berries, but you can use them in exactly the same way. Nannyberry and wayfaring tree are quite large shrubs. They're both members of the viburnum group. They are usually used as large background shrubs in the landscape, but you can use them as that and still get edible fruit off of them if you so choose. All right, the two last ones here are becoming more and more popular. Sea buckthorn especially. This is quite a large shrub. It's the one on the bottom right here with the orange berries. The city of Calgary plants them quite a bit on their boulevards or on the islands between lanes on our roads. The reason for this is they are super, super drought tolerant and very hardy. So they grow quite well there. To get fruit production, you do need a male and a female plant to get fruit. They're often used, besides being used by the city of Calgary, in yards as a blockading hedge. They're very thorny very thorny, and quite large, like I mentioned. So really good for keeping out things like deers and rabbits. Sea buckthorn is a superfruit. It is quite often used not only for fresh eating, but in skincare due to the antioxidants that it contains. And the best way actually to harvest sea buckthorn is to cut off an entire branch with the fruit on it, stick it in your freezer and wait for it to freeze. Then you can pull off the berries. It's the easiest and least messy way of harvesting sea buckthorn berries. Otherwise, they tend to smoosh when you pull them off and you get a great big mess. They're usually large enough and productive enough that it is fine for you to cut off a number of branches without affecting your shrubs. Last but not least, we have goji berry. This is also known as wolfberry. This is a very large shrub, also drought tolerant, just like the sea buckthorn. Also considered a superfruit. Lots of antioxidants in this guy as well. Usually you can find them in natural food stores dried, and that's actually the best way to eat them, even from your home shrubs. They are quite astringent when you eat them fresh, so people usually dry them first and then use them like raisins in baking or eating them fresh as a dried fruit. All right, so that's it for shrub fruit for Calgary and area gardens. There are a ton of options out there for you. There is one that will fit your situation and your yard for sure out of all the ones that we talked about today. Don't forget, if you have an abundance of fruit you can't use, gardeners are fantastic sharers. So keep your friends and family in mind, as well as the Calgary Food Bank. They love to get fresh produce. If you have too much fruit to pick yourself, there's an organization called Calgary Harvest that will pick your fruit and make sure it does not go to waste. And don't forget that just because we plant these shrubs and trees for fruit production and for food, that does not mean that they aren't beautiful on their own. This is a choke cherry on the left-hand side, Chums, and on the right-hand side, this is the bark of a cherry tree. Absolutely gorgeous. All right, well, that's it for this video today. Thank you for watching. Next time, we're gonna talk about all the other fruits we haven't mentioned so far in this video and the last video. So that'll be ground fruits, vine fruits, and brambles. Hope you learned something today, and hope to see you on our next video. Yummy gardening, everybody.